Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happenstance into this Truth Bomb riff. It is Tuesday, March 18th at approximately 10:40 a.m. my time. And my name is Patrick Lovell. I refer to myself, and I hope everybody else will moving forward, as the producer. I have the $71 trillion truth. And I'm tired. I'm tired, not because I have a hangover from St. Patrick's Day. I hope many of you watching this don't either. And if you do, I'll make a quick reference that I just read that Dropkick Murphys have been kicked off of X for kicking out somebody with a MAGA hat at one of their, I think, at a St. Patrick's Day concert yesterday. And I thought that was cool because I was referring yesterday to some things I said online that I was fond of all of the days of, going and drinking Irish or green beer all day and throwing down and listening to Dropkick Murphys and Flogging Molly and all of the others. And the energy that I had in the community and the involvement. And that's kind of the world I come from. I'm an old skater, punk rock guy, with a whole lot of experience in that space. But they're just one of many people that are responding to the things going on. But the reason I wanted to hit record and I don't know. I don't know what it's going to take to connect with you. I don't know what it's going to take to have millions of you learn who I am and what I have and share. Because that's the only way to beat the algorithm. That's the only way to beat the Borg of corruption. That's the only way to beat the billionaire class that has hidden and obfuscated everything that I'm revealing to you for now many years. Now, if you're just discovering me on my YouTube channel, I think this is my 571st Truth Bomb riff over the course of 3 years. And literally, if you dig into any one of them, it'll be pretty much the same formula of reacting to what's going on and using it to backpedal and engineer into what it is that I'm revealing to reveal the Emperor's New Clothes on Really Bad Acid, AKA the forest for the trees, so that you can understand what is going on. But I got to always start with, look, for those of you who have read me on X, for example, and by the way, I've been stalled at like 11.4 thousand followers after seeing huge fluctuations after the election. And I should probably be up to 1 million by now if it wasn't for the chicanery and the behind the scenes throttling down of free speech and truth, of course, by everybody's favorite specter and billionaire bad guy, nerd Nazi himself, which I'm the opposite of. I'm the anti-Elon. And what I'm revealing to you is the synergy, the intersection of everything that everybody is responding to, but yet still can't get on the same page of what it is that I have to somehow penetrate your ecosphere. And I'm looking for the people like me, just people that know how things work, people that are smart, that are educated, that have had careers, that know the world and know what the situation we're in, for starters, and then get you on board to be first early adopters to building this incredible tidal wave resurgence of the American dream. Because I can guarantee you that Bernie Sanders, okay, is as good of a guy as he is, and his tour of the, I don't know, the anti-oligarchy, in going out there to connect with the working class, to try to get his message out there, which is the same exact message he's been delivering for 14 years. And same with and he'll be joined by AOC. Okay, does she have a big audience? Have they broken through? Are they, in the Senate and Congress, and are they people that are important and calibrated to be able to meet this moment? Yes and no. For one side of the equation, yeah, because they're in the game, but they don't know how to defeat the Borg of corruption. They're not threats to corruption. They're not. They're not threats to corruption. Bernie's been playing by the rules of the corrupt for a long time. Okay, that's because he's playing by the rules of how the whole thing works, and he hasn't been able to defeat it because he speaks in platitudes. Now, to the contrary of that, AOC, I mean, she made all sorts of promises that she'd never be a sellout, and she's a sellout. I think her really only my mind is just flooded with images of stupidity and ridiculous things like, she goes to the art galleries and the big, functions, and she wears a dress that says tax the rich. And, that's like, okay, great. What, but she doesn't know that RICO is a crime. Literally the mother of all organized crime. They're not a threat to corruption. Okay. But he's made choices. He's made choices this whole time. Same with Elizabeth Warren. Same with anybody in the Democratic Party who doesn't have a vision to be able to beat what it is that I'm revealing to you. And the reason why I have to record right now is because I have been saying, especially those of you who have followed me, who have seen these truth bombs, who follow me on X and now on Blue Sky, I've been saying for now 3 years, corruption births and fuels fascism. Now, I've known that for a lot longer, but that's the amount of time that I've spent pretty much hard driving on social media to try to get people to understand where I'm coming from because I got quashed. I got quashed by the board. I got quashed by BlackRock because what I reveal is how BlackRock became basically the linchpin and the pivot that undergirds everything that I'm revealing to you. And I know a lot of you out there are like, oh yeah, BlackRock, wasn't I supposed to, I heard about them about, I don't know, 6 months ago, a year ago. Aren't they a big, important company that seems to operate in the shadows and have a lot of power? Yeah, and more so, and they don't operate in the shadows, they operate in broad daylight, but there's so much going on. It's probably hard to really vector in and understand who they are, why they are, and what they are in context to everything else. So first and foremost, Rachel Maddow last night does this piece, right? And if you follow Rachel consistently, I watch Rachel every night. I'm not a big fan. I'm very critical of Rachel. I think she's brilliant in some ways, and I think she's a complete sellout in others. But I have to watch her because of what she's responding to, because it paints the picture of exactly what I'm revealing to you that she's not. So, for example, last night, very important story, she reveals how last week there was how did she describe it? A soft altercation with the boys from Doge who basically walked into a government agency in part of this initiative of Doge to basically take over the department and shut it down. And in this particular case, it was called the Institute for Peace. Now, I thought that was kind of interesting because there were some nuances that this Institute for Peace goes back. It's kind of like a think tank. It deals with all the ways to avoid, armed conflict, yada, yada, yada. I'm not an expert in it. Just found out about it yesterday, but I can only imagine what it does based on what I know, how these think tanks operate and how they're funded and that sort of thing. And anyway, the point of this particular story was that the guys from Doge, the teenagers from Doge, the big balls from Doge, whoever the fuck they were, they walk in, they have no mandate, they have no right to actually physically walk in and have a light touch physical altercation with the folks that refused to abide by their shutdown at the Institute for Peace, because there were some nuances about how it doesn't fit into this budgeting parameter and yada, yada, yada. But what these guys did from Doge is they went and they came back with the guns. Presumably, and this is where it gets a little bit murky, but Rachel Maddow had described it as, I think, the U.S. Marshals. But that she followed up saying that the U.S. Marshals weren't responding to her inquiry to find out if that's exactly what happened. So they're remaining silent. Now, in addition to that, apparently there was another aspect of this where when they returned with marshals, there were those from the FBI that were involved. And her whole point was, okay, wait a second. So here's an unelected guy, Elon Musk, right, who's the president's largest donor, who then creates this Department of Government Efficiency, which is not a government institution at all. It's nothing. It's just through executive orders, just creating mayhem and running amok within the federal government to do everything that we've seen for the last 2 weeks, that are basically shutting down everything from NOLA, and the scientists in weather data and nuclear scientists and teachers at the Department of Education and so on and so forth. I mean, just absolute calamity. Okay. Now, for those of us who have expected everything from Donald Trump proclaiming that he was going to be a dictator on day one to the knowledge of Project 2025 and everything that the Heritage Foundation is all about, and these technocrats that want to basically do what they were calling for 20 years ago with Grover Norquist, to break up the federal government to where you could, fit it in a bathtub, because they want to create privatization, which is neoliberalism that goes back to the 70s and the Chicago School and, Friedman, and what they did in Argentina and throughout South America as test cases. And now this whole thing has come home to roost, and there's a whole lot of other complexities that are involved. But to stay on track of what this particular moment elucidates is what I've been saying the whole time. But of course, from Rachel Maddow's perspective, it removes everything that I'm revealing to you that you have to wrap your heads around to understand what is going on and why. Okay. So again, remember the question that she asked. How is it possible that the largest contributor to President Trump's campaign, Elon Musk, can have a position to where literally the law enforcement of the federal government is acting on behalf of a guy that A, isn't operating legally within the confines of the Constitution and how things are budgeted and what these programs and these departments are supposed to do once they actually, get created by Congress. Everything is an upside down perversion of power because they can and nobody's stopping them. And the law is dead. And there's no there's no meaningful response or pushback from Congress, which is where this would come from, and not to mention law enforcement and the law and the courts and everything else. And yeah, Rachel and company are depending on lawsuits in the courts to jam up a lot of these DOJ initiatives. But obviously, Trump isn't following judge's orders. Okay, he's like, no, fuck you. This on top of what we're talking about, and then of course yesterday they, some of the big news as well in context to two significant scenarios that included, the Palestinian activist that got, or I guess he's being held in Louisiana. Like basically all of his constitutional rights were just tossed out the window, and they just, basically they're going to deport him, I guess, I think is the case. But then they deported a whole bunch of Venezuelan immigrants that, of course, Donald Trump and Elon Musk are saying are part of these organized gangs and everything else. I think at MS-13 and yada, 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 but there's no proof of that, no evidence of that, at least according to the Rachel Maddows of the world and that sort of thing. And so they just, again, ignored judges' orders and just are doing whatever the hell they want, including being able to move the FBI and, of course, the U.S. Marshals into position to be the muscle and the heavy to break up pieces of government that they have no right to do. And so what Rachel's mechanics of this whole thing, and she looks at the camera doughy-eyed and flummoxed and beside herself with the deep puffs and everything else, and justifiably so on everything. And she says, oh, my God, what are we? And she doesn't even say it out loud, but she says, what does this mean we are? Well, it means what she's inferring, which is we're now, she can't bring herself to say it because she doesn't want to think that all of the Democratic, stopgaps and what's going on in Congress and the Democratic Party and judges that were assigned by Biden and everybody else that aren't, able to build a critical mass of people that are now starting to show up all around the country in these sort of shattered, shall we say, and disperse protests in a variety of ways, the most effective being, I think, which was performative, but the Tesla owners basically reenacting the Tea Party and, throwing their Teslas back at Elon and saying, fuck you. And by the way, I did see that, what we saw after that, there was threats from the Department of Justice and Pam Bondi that there's going to be significant consequences for anybody that is caught protesting on the grounds of the dealerships of Teslas. And think about who these people are who own Teslas, by the way. They've got means to can afford attorneys and that sort of thing to fight back. But she says that you're going to be basically treated as domestic terrorists. Now, meanwhile, I just happened to see on my feed right before I hit record on this that it looks like there was somebody who may have firebombed a Tesla dealership down in Las Vegas, which I guess would be an act of terrorism, to be quite frank with you. But yeah, shit is splintering and getting out of control fast. And it's a continuation of everything that's been going on. But to my specific point and why you need to understand who I am and where I'm coming from and what I have and how I am the guy that's got to be who millions of you gather with and unite with, and we become one to be able to turn the tables. Because again, Bernie doesn't have the ability to do it. He speaks in platitudes. He's not going to give you the details that I have. AOC doesn't even know that RICO is a real crime, okay? Just to put it into perspective. And still, they work for the vertical top-down billionaire class that they proclaim not to. Whether or not they get direct funding, they get funding from the ground up and all that kind of stuff, I'm sure, in both of their cases. But they're still playing by the rules of the corrupt, and they're not giving you the details of what I'm giving to you. And what are those details that I'm giving to you? Well, first of all, the reason why I'm the producer with the $71 trillion truth is because I made a long form documentary series that the entire system had to suppress. They had to quash. They had to make sure that was silenced and that, yeah, and they rug pulled my life in the process. Okay, but whatever. I've been in this battle on the righteous grind for now years. Okay, and what the con is, and it's for free at www.thecon.tv, and I could have just said thecon.tv, and it's the blueprint for the largest criminal conspiracy and cover up in history that never ended. It shows how millions of Americans were targeted and set up and quashed like a roofie and rape paradigm to basically what did the imperial powers do? Smash and grab. That's what they did to the American people in the 2008 great financial crisis through nothing but racketeering, through fraud. Fraud is not shenanigans. Fraud is illegal theft by deception. And there's different remedies based on the degree of the crime. And if they're felonies and they move up to a degree 3 underneath the RICO statutes, the consequences and the remedies are big time. Okay? But none of that was used in our paradigm of law enforcement and investigation and the Department of Justice and the FBI and AGs around the country because they all play ball. Because the Obama administration chose to save and float the financial system because they were afraid it was going to create a global calamity that would then lead to, I don't know what, World War III, maybe, probably massive, pain and suffering by millions of people, just like the Great Depression that led to World War II, probably. But what they chose to do is they let millions upon millions of Americans, tens of millions, I'd say north of 30 million Americans directly, and north of 150 million people worldwide, basically be expendable and thrown in the garbage because of all the racketeering that was involved, that then the courts of the United States were complicit in covering up and playing ball with the entire corruption of this financial system, through which we gave tens of trillions of dollars illegally. And that's what Rachel Maddow's not telling you. And that's what creates my methodology: corruption births and fuels fascism. Everybody knows the story of P. Diddy, right? Everybody knows what a freak off is. What the billionaires and the billionaire apparatuses have been doing for the last 14 years is that they've been looting the full faith and credit of the United States to basically roofie, gang rape and pillage, and smash and grab, to put themselves above the law and above market forces, which makes them feudal lords, which is exactly why the American patriots had a revolution against King George III. Same story, pretty much same story, just different degrees, but the exact same story. And what they've done is they've operated in the shadows forever, and they corrupted the Supreme Court. They've always corrupted our Congress. They've corrupted now the presidency. And now we have a fascist dictatorship using the law, the FBI and the DOJ, because, after the election that was stolen, and there's all sorts of evidence that 3.5 million votes were suppressed, not to mention all of what was going on with the voting booths and Spectre and everything else that I don't have all the answers to, but I do know that there was anomalies in specific places that were impossibilities, particularly in swing states. And is that so hard to actually consider, considering that, oh yeah, they tried to steal the election in 2020, and then they, meaning MAGA, they had the J6 insurrection that was never held to account. And therein lies my biggest criticism of Rachel Maddow. So Rachel Maddow has been paid about $42 million over the course of the last 2 years per year to basically hyper focus on Donald Trump. Okay, that's her job. But Donald Trump is really the emperor's new clothes and really bad acid, and is a red carpet reflection to everything that I'm revealing to you. He isn't the causality of this. He's somebody that was actually created by this, and he's the consequence of this, okay? But he's still a small player, and I'll tell you why. So the federal government, with all of its 91 indictments that was coming through Letitia James and the state AG of New York, and Alvin Bragg, the DA of New York City, that got the 34 felony convictions, down in Fonnie Willis's Fulton County based on the racketeering, and then ultimately all things Jack Smith as it relates to Mar-a-Lago and everything that got jammed up by Judge Eileen Cannon, and then ultimately the shit that went down in the Supreme Court. The effort on the federal government's behalf was 91 indictments that, in short order, profess that Donald Trump defrauded the United States using illegal theft by deception in deceptive acts and practices, using racketeering, falsification of business records, and forgeries. Okay. What I'm showing you and what I've revealed in my work, The Con, is that not for one guy or one organization, but the entire paradigm of the financial system, that we're involved with tens of thousands of employees involved with tens of millions of felonies that then basically overran the government. And then the government was complicit in cleaning it all up. And it was absolutely insane and ridiculous and mind boggling that Rachel Maddow never understood. She understood the robo signing for a short time, but she never delved into this because why? Because she is the communication director for the Wall Street meritocracy revolving door. She didn't have a green light to go after that story. If she did, I wouldn't have had to do what I did. Or the New York Times, by the way, or the Washington Post, or the LA Times, all owned by billionaires. But they didn't do the work on behalf of the American people. So the media turned out to be fake media because this was a calamity of ginormous proportions. We're talking 150 million people that led to at least $71 trillion being looted illegally by the system to put them above the law and market forces. And now we're supposed to be like, oh my God, we're now a fascist country? We haven't been a democracy for a long time. We're a corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal syndicate that uses the full faith and credit of the United States to guarantee the mafiocracy that is now fueling fascism. Okay, that's what we are, technically. Honestly, if you could follow the bouncing ball, that's technically what we are. How do I know this stuff? Well, if you saw The Con, and if you've seen my work in the New Untouchables, and if you've seen my 571 truth bombs, you know that I'm connected to the top legal minds in the country that worked at the highest levels of the Department of Justice, the FBI, the SEC, state AGs around the country, and the greatest criminologist in the history of the world, a gentleman by the name of William K. Black, who is the Michael Jordan of criminology, meaning the kind of guy that can take on this absolute insane power in what most of us would expect would happen in a country where that was presumably democracy, where the law is supreme. Yeah, these people are the new untouchables. Okay, do you know who the untouchables were? Do you know how they took down, Al Capone, and these guys could not be corrupted back in the 30s? That was the war they were fighting then against corruption. Same war now. Okay. And I'm connected to all of these guys. And it took us thousands of hours and millions of dollars to accomplish what the $90 billion apparatus of our federal government didn't do on behalf of we the people, because we're not of we the people. We're of and for by the corruption. And Rachel Maddow is a part of that corporate corruption, as is, quite frankly, all of the Democrats that I had mentioned to you. And you all know this. Nobody has an answer. Nobody has the paradigm. Nobody understands exactly who did what, when, and how they got away with it to, again, elicit what it is that I'm revealing to you that everybody's asking the question and they're all confounded by is how could the billionaires they're asking specifically, how could Elon Musk, i.e., who I refer to as Spectre, for anybody who knows the James Bond villain going back to the 50s, who's basically this nerd Nazi that's involved with this hijacking and part of a global cabal of white supremacists, basically, that are on the move, i.e. Putin and all the guys that are, Orban and in the matrix of the Hive matrix that in the United States could include, of course, the Mercers and, Miriam Adelson, because of the whole connection with Israel's situation, Netanyahu, which is a whole nother confounding scenario here, but it fits in line with everything that I'm revealing to you. I know how these guys operate. I know what they did. And I'm going to say this in terms of two things that Rachel Maddow, this multi-million-dollar a year personality, missed completely. And now she's got the nerve to ask these questions because she failed. She's the reason we're in this business. If she actually did what it is that I'm telling you, we'd never be in this situation. But because her and all of mainstream media failed, because again, they're in the network, the Hive network, to support the corruption that floated themselves above all of the Americans in the lower 90%, have been expendable this whole time. Who are you in this matrix? Are you a billionaire? Because if you are, you're not going to listen to me. Okay, unless you're a good one and you know this is all true and you want to be on board with somebody who now, this is what happens throughout history, right? Tyranny, 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 revolution. Tyranny, 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 revolution. This happens all the fucking time. But it's really hard to see. But I'm an American. I'm a patriot. I love this country. The types of people that I orient to are wide and broad. But some of the people that come to mind, based on this analogy that I'm trying to make, I was a huge Joe Strummer fan. Do you know who Joe Strummer is? He was the lead singer and the creator of the Clash punk rock back in the 70s and 80s, who basically created my worldview that led me on that huge, massive journey. And some of my heroes include everybody from Muhammad Ali to Bob Marley to Martin Luther King, for example, among others. Oh, yeah, and Moses was a big influence in my life, okay? Among others, right? But the reason I say I'm making the correlation so you can kind of understand who I am outside of what I mentioned about Dropkick Murphys. Yeah, I've also been to more dead shows than I can count. Okay, when I was a young man, but I'm not a pacifist. I'm a dynamic entrepreneur, competitor who's played football, been in sports, done all sorts of things, who understands how to achieve, okay? Who knows how to perform. This is what I know of American dynamism, okay? And the one thing that I can't stand is cheating or corruption above all else. Okay. And it's not like I can't stand it. No, it's my mortal enemy because it creates fascism. What do you think Mussolini was? By the way, even though we didn't call it fascism at the time, but the tyranny of everything that took place in the Middle Ages, really for 1,000 years, is predicated on corruption. Everything, everything from the Holy Roman Empire and what is it called when you can pay for forgiveness? It's not absolution. It's kind of like absolution, but yeah, the kings. If you know Game of Thrones, obviously they depicted it very well with the High Sparrow and all the stuff that was going on in the Red Keep. The long and the short of it is, it was like to keep regular people controlled. That's really what it comes down to. And the corruption was the revolving door. It's the same fucking thing now. Okay. So Rachel Maddow is like, oh my God, wait a second. And she tells it every night, but this was kind of like last night. It was like, we've crossed the Rubicon, right? Because now here is evidence that the guns from the FBI and the marshals that are unidentified are actually showing up at a government office that's owned and controlled with all of those property rights and everything that's involved legally, and basically taking it over like a coup. Which means, what are we? That's the question she's asking. We're a fascist country. Yeah, and we see, Il Duce, the orange turd idiot freaking of the motherlode of idiocracy, Donald Trump, i.e., the Joker, straight out of Gotham, standing at the Kennedy Center, basically doing one of these things, right? On top of everything else. How much are you going to take? Veterans basically had all of their, benefits pulled. The idiot, Donald Trump, who had 6 deferments from Vietnam, props himself up as some sort of proto-nationalist. And, the military is his sort of patriotism. And yet he basically betrayed his service. And now he's betraying the veterans who actually served at I don't know how many tours, for example, that we saw post 9/11 in Iraq and Afghanistan and everything else. And they're having their benefits pulled by Doge and this, South African immigrant who's the richest guy in the world as a result of everything I'm telling you. Do you think that Elon sold more Teslas during COVID to quadruple his wealth? No. Do you think he made over $181 billion since he spent $377 million on the election because he sold more Teslas? No, we see numbers all over the world that Tesla's numbers are in the dump. The stock is tanking, and people are protesting at Tesla dealerships all over the country and the world. And I've seen some stuff, and I don't know how accurate it is, but like 94% of Germans say they'll never buy a Tesla, whatever that means. Okay, I could go on and on and on. This is all part of the same matrix. And what you have to hear from me again is I have all of the answers that can turn this upside down and the pathway forward. There is no vision from the Democrats. Our vision is the Clean New Deal. You can find it at thecleannewdeal.org. If you go to my YouTube page, you can see that I recently did a tutorial that took me 2 hours to record that walk you through every single aspect of the New Deal so that if you could just turn off the volume on all the lies and suddenly hear the truth, you could become a nuclear reaction vector to the big drip bang of truth I'm dropping. And together we could be a force multiplier. That's basically the universal construct, right? From the singularity comes light that forces its way through the darkness because of the power of the supernova. That's what has to happen. And what I've been saying over and over and over for as long as I can remember, that the reason that this hasn't already happened is because most of us are in silos. Most of us are on our phones. We pay attention to what's on our bandwidth. We pay attention to what's in the four corners of our universe, and we basically skew with whatever our life dictates, right? Not to mention whether it's like we belong to a specific group, a gender, or a sexual orientation, or whatever the case is. And everybody is like in their own silos. That's the thing we've been doing since Me Too and Black Lives Matter, and every reaction to every injustice that's been going on for the last 20 years. But that's not strong enough to break the uniformity, if you want, the conformity of MAGA that is kind of the popular culture moat around, this billionaire apparatus that has complete control of the United States. And what service to what? Into cutting funding for the FAA so that you could be on a plane and be in a collision today, as a matter of fact, so that, we don't have the ability to predict hurricanes, so that we don't have the ability to basically perform all of the nuclear umbrella, day-to-day routines that we've been doing for now, I don't know, 1945 and growing. I mean, through the nature of the Cold War and everything. I mean, Jesus Christ, people, what don't you get? And so what am I doing in terms of being able to provide you the details of who did what, when, and how, the largest criminal conspiracy and racketeering in the history of the world that then overwhelmed the United States government, stole from the United States government to the tune of tens of trillions of dollars, where the billionaire apparatus is above the law and market forces like P. Diddy, roofing and raping the American dream, the law, and common sense. So that we could have Doge, so that we could have fascism, so that we could have all of these assholes that are basically antithetical to everything that tens of millions of us stand for. And by the way, the election, even though it was stolen and all of these other things, even if you take it at face value, it was what, 74 to 72 million, right? So it certainly wasn't a tidal wave. It wasn't what Obama got in 2008. But Obama blew it. Obama completely betrayed us because he spoke out of both sides of his mouth. He had the capacity to basically, fix what was going on, but he lied on 60 Minutes, among other things. And he said what Wall Street did was unethical, but it wasn't illegal. Bullshit. To the tunes of tens of trillions of fucking dollars that used our goddamn courts to be able to destroy tens of millions of people, to create the carnage and the cataclysmic everything that's been going on for 15 years that people don't even understand. And yet we see millions of people on the streets that are carnage, right? Many of them are probably drug addicts because of stuff that they couldn't contend with. They got divorces, maybe they committed suicide. Bin Laden could never have done or dreamed of the terrorism that our financial structure created through financial terrorism. And oh yeah, I'll finish up with this, okay? In terms of Rachel Maddow and her not seeing the forest for the trees, right? So here she is like, oh my God, we're a fascist country. And she's acting like, how could this happen? So I'll hit the rewind on the most early version of this, which has been going on the whole time, but it's crystal clear. And this goes for Congress as well. So the J6 investigation was, let me start with this. January 6th, if you were watching it at the time, and I remember it like it was yesterday, if you were watching MSNBC during the January 6th insurrection, Rachel Maddow and the hens from MSNBC were acting as if, oh my God, nobody saw this coming. Meanwhile, MAGA was advertising that they were there by the thousands, and I saw it many days in advance, and they were all conglomerating at the Washington Trump Hotel, and they were throwing beers back and having a good time and getting ready for, storming the Capitol. And Rachel at the time was like, I wonder what that's all about. And then this many years later, it's kind of like, well, how is it possible that the guns can be used against government agencies, and are we actually fascist? So we had 4 years from that point of the insurrection where Rachel Maddow would cover, once a week. And she did a really great series called Ultra, which put us into perspective of how this stuff happened before with America First, because MAGA was just an extension of America First. And I guarantee Steve Bannon knew that a long time ago. But in terms of the actual insurrection itself, think about what happened before that. We had Black Lives Matter specifically, right? And during Black Lives Matter, we saw unmarked vans with dudes with all sorts of firepower in masks, covered, unidentified, yanking protesters into vans. Now, as it turns out, there was a lot of speculation that these guys were returned mercenaries that were potentially working for Blackwater that came out of theaters like Afghanistan, and they were pros, and they were guns for hire. But when it entered the mainstream discussion at the time, Bill Barr, the Attorney General at the time, was like, "Yeah, no, we're aware of that, and I've legalized it." It basically kind of one of these acts in response to, I don't know, theaters or act of war, I should say, kind of similar to what happened yesterday that we haven't used since, the Japanese internment camps, right? And so when the J6 investigation happened, I mean, first of all, the way I was looking at it was there's more firepower within the Beltway and in the immediate vicinity than probably anywhere on Earth. First of all, we didn't see the National Guard put into action. And of course, that would have been by the executive branch, which would have been Donald Trump not calling for the order. But actually, all of the methodology within the departments of who does what, when, and how to respond to threats that would have seen this at the Pentagon and any of our security divisions, obviously, were watching this and they had to have been involved with it, which means it had to be pre-planned. And the guys that ended up showing, like I said, during Black Lives Matter at the Capitol for the insurrection, many of them were obviously professionals. A lot of them were cops that came from all over the country. How did they get there? Did they pay for their own way? I don't think so. If I had the resources, I would have checked out the Mercers. I would have checked out Bannon. I would have checked all the guys that had been paying, backdoor money at the Supreme Court. I would have found out what the payment mechanisms were and where they were coming from, and I would have backtracked it and found out who did what, when, and how, and why. But how come the federal government couldn't pull that off? Well, they couldn't pull off what I'm telling you about 2008 that I reveal that we spent millions of dollars and thousands of hours to aggregate and put forward. And then, of course, we got quashed. Everything I'm telling you is absolute truth, okay? And you just have to be able to connect with your own reason to go like, Patrick's making some sense here. Because, yeah, you're right. I saw plenty of tear gas and state officials respond to Black Lives Matter, but I didn't see them, when the MAGAs were showing up at, state courthouses protesting, like the Michigan governor, for example, during COVID and all of that stuff, right? Over and over and over, we saw these guys basically doing whatever they wanted to. They had the liberty to do whatever they wanted. And I'm talking about MAGA protests, okay? And the insurrection was kind of the ultimate aspect of that. And then, of course, what happens after the insurrection? Well, we have the likes of Fox, in cahoots with Tucker Carlson before they fired Tucker Carlson, basically reconfiguring that it was a peaceful demonstration to gaslight the living shit out of everybody who was like, oh yeah, we're on that side, right? Just like Donald Trump, the Joker criminal, is not a criminal. He's the guy that's going to save us because he's going to, it's not illegal if you're doing it to save the country, is really kind of the idea, right? And that's what these guys have had kind of in mind for a very long time. And that's what the billionaire class has been funneling all of their billions of stolen money to basically foment this, cultural revolution, so to speak. And we're right in the middle of it. And this is probably the end of it, quite frankly, the end of the line. Okay. This is fascism that you can't ignore. And everybody is under the gun of this. And one of my frustrations the whole time was like, for example, my God, there was 60 million people or 30 million people directly that got fucking hammered by 2008. But I guess their lives were so shattered that they couldn't come together and they wanted to blame the wrong people anyway, because a lot of these guys got on board with MAGA and Trump. And I kept telling them, you can't be for Trump and against corruption. But that's what happens when people are fucking crazy. That's what happens when they have Stockholm syndrome. And that's another part of this whole thing that could be manipulated in a James Jones kind of way to where they're all drinking the Kool-Aid of the great leader, which is what we've seen from Hitler and Mussolini to North Korea to, Orban and the stuff that was happening in Brazil before they got a catch on it, right? And it's happening in our country, a country that we love, a country that we can't sit on our laurels and accept anyone to turn the tables on this if they're not equipped with the nuclear reaction of how the corruption works. And so Rachel Maddow spent the last 4 years going into Ultra to tell the story about America First while ignoring the nature of Eric Prince and the mercenaries and the billionaire funneling class and how they also did it in media. She never put the whole paradigm together because she was paid to hyper focus on Trump. I kept saying from, screaming from the rafters and the mountaintops for the last year, Elon is what's going on all the time. And both her and Lawrence O'Donnell, who I respect immensely, completely ignored it. And now all they can talk about is Elon Musk. Think about that. So she ignored the entire paradigm. She didn't do her job to be able to use her millions of dollars of resources and proximity to be able to tell those stories because she's not a journalist. What she is a propagandist for the Democratic revolving door DNC that wants to have that part of the culture wars take shape so that half the people are looking at Trumpers and half the Trumpers are looking. I think that's all kind of by design. I don't know if Rachel Maddow knows that she's a part of that, quite frankly. But again, everybody, and if you got to understand this part of it, from the 2008 great financial crisis, it was all based on predation of those who have no idea how the system works initially, particularly African Americans and Latinos in this setup with all of these, mortgages and everything else that we call liar's loans. But they were fed into the securities that were fed to the white working class pensioners. So it literally got everybody. And in the aftermath of the great financial crisis, what did we have? We had Occupy Wall Street, which manifested Bernie Sanders, and we had the Americans for Prosperity, which became the Tea Party, which manifested MAGA, which propped up Trump. And Trump plagiarized Bernie in 2016, but Bernie wasn't telling the full story because Bernie asked the right question because he was following his lead from the same guy that I followed my lead from, who was a consultant to Bernie, and people that I know were actually economic advisors to Bernie, and they gave him a lot of this information. And he said in the 2016 debate with Hillary Clinton, Wall Street's business model is fraud. But you could have heard a pin drop. Nobody followed up with what does that mean? It's just what? A statement? It's no, our system, which has created this massive conundrum of corruption that's created fascism because everybody in the system is too cozy, too comfy. And the only reason that this country really didn't rise up in the aftermath is because we floated the top 10%. That's why. Because the smartest people in this country who had the most means, that had the most assets, did very well as a result of this corruption that they weren't a part of. And they're like, what's the problem? Meanwhile, 90% of the Americans were circling around the drain. Now, everybody is a target, thanks to not doing anything, because they had their heads in the sand, because they were too complacent, too comfortable, while the world was falling apart around them, okay? And here we are, and Rachel Maddow missed the whole thing, and I'm going to even hit the rewind button just slightly further. So 9/11, one of the most catastrophic moments in my lifetime, which I still can't get out of my head, and I still think of it like it was yesterday. But we knew where the terrorist cells were. We knew who were funding the terrorist cells. It would have been a snap to be able to infiltrate them and shut them down. But the agencies that had the information weren't talking to each other because they were puppeteered by the guys at the top, which include Dick Cheney and Condoleezza Rice and others, that didn't want the information to get together so they didn't have to react, so that this could happen to create a reaction. Quite frankly, I think the same exact thing happened in Israel on October 7th. We know the Israelis knew that Hamas was planning this attack for a very long time, and they gave them just enough rope to justify everything that they've done since. And same with us. We went to, obviously, Iraq. We went to Afghanistan. We had these basically wars of attrition where we didn't really want to destroy them. We wanted to occupy them. We wanted to feed the military industrial complex and then take over through the hive the fossil fuel paradigm. Because my theory is that at that time period, we had enough technology to move to a renewable energy paradigm. But the powers that be that depend on all this stuff, who are all of these hives of this financial fossil fuel construct, didn't want that. And so they decided to smash and grab the world. Yeah, it's pretty sophisticated and it's insane, but this is all that happened. And Rachel Maddow continues to think, for example, that the 9/11 Commission got to the bottom of this, and that's the gold standard. Same with Anderson Cooper, same with every other idiot in mainstream media. Meanwhile, Bob Graham, the guy who was the head of the 9/11 Commission, had been speaking out courageously for over a decade on behalf of the 9/11 families, that Saudi Arabia was involved, that we thwarted that the Bush administration basically quashed and suffocated the commission and starved it of resources so it couldn't actually go as far as it needed to be able to get the truth because they wanted to hide the truth. And look how that's playing out right now with whatever Trump is doing in Yemen and, Netanyahu is doing in Gaza and the Abraham Accords and a solidified front between Saudi, Israel and Trump, and, Iran's on the menu. Okay. And I don't know how that works out with Putin, quite frankly. I really don't. That one's a little confusing to me. All right, I've talked more than I wanted to, so I'll bring it full closure. So those are just monumental examples of the failure of what we've been living in for the last 25 years that has created more and more and more devastation. And now we're at the end of this routine. It's all falling apart. And I swear to God, it looks to me like Elon and the billionaire apparatus and Trump are going to crash the economy. They've got crypto set up. That's a whole nother part of this whole thing. And they want to do this to be able to do the next phase of smash and grab, just destroy everybody, go into a Great Depression. Everybody can't fight back because they're on their heels and they're starving and all that kind of thing. And this is intelligence war. This is what they've been doing forever. And who's they? It's the billionaires and the billionaire apparatuses. And a lot of people are basically, it's going to blow up in their face as well. Unintended consequences. Just like the industrialists in Germany that were like, oh yeah, Hitler's our guy. They might not have ideologically been behind him, but they were like, let's let him do his thing because, it works for us. And then until it didn't. And, that's the same exact thing. There was a great movie that was done by David O. Russell called Amsterdam that I think nobody knows about, even though it has the greatest stars in modern day Hollywood, from Robert De Niro to Christian Bale to Margot Robbie to John David Washington. And it was this brilliant portrayal of that era, which was the America First era, which portrayed the guys puppeteering that the whole time were these billionaire, well, at that time, they'll just call them the power apparatus, that they were basically playing roulette with fascism because fascism worked for them. Again, corporate fascism undergirded by a criminal syndicate that uses the full faith and credit of the United States to guarantee the mafiocracy so that they can then fuel fascism. It's central control. It's the opposite of democracy. It's the opposite of the supremacy of law because it's all corruption. And that's what I have answers to. And I created the Clean New Deal to turn all of it around. If you go to the precepts of the Clean New Deal, you'll see exactly what the plan is moving forward. I've talked long enough. My God, people, what don't you see? What don't you know? You all see it, you all know it, but you don't know the details, and that's what matters. And we've got to galvanize by the millions. So if you're a veteran, if you're somebody who currently serves for the police, if you're somebody who serves in the military, and you're not going to bend the knee to the corruption of our Constitution that you took loyalty to, are you going to serve the corrupt fascist dictator? That's the choice you've got to make. And if you're not going to, join me and everybody else who are in those silos, from Black Lives Matter to Me Too to LGBTQ trans and everybody in between. Anybody who believes in liberty and justice for all and the rule of law and democracy and the 248 years of the American experiment turned nightmare, help me redeem the dream. Because when you live in light, you live in truth. When you live a lie, you are depraved. When you have the truth, you're bulletproof. When you lie, inside you die. Stop lying. Stop buying lies. When you, me, and everyone you see who isn't a Nazi comes together, for dignity, decency, liberty, and justice for all, sustainability, and beauty, it is our destiny to create the Clean New Deal to purge the misery of tyranny, to create the renaissance of possibility. Why? Because there's a lot better ways to spend $71 trillion than on this fucking mayhem that is destroying everything that matters. My name is Patrick Lovell. I'm the producer. You can find me, reach out to me anytime, but we have to galvanize now. Onwards and upwards.